Hello and welcome to another interview episode of the Imperial Truth. For those of you who are new to the show, the Imperial Truth is a twice monthly podcast where we talk all about the Horus Heresy, from the lore, including all the books from Forge World and Black Library, playing the game, modelling, painting, anything that comes under the Horus Heresy banner, basically. Normally it's myself and Neil. But, as I say, today we got this special interview with Nick Kyme, so it's just myself on that one. If that sounds like something you're interested in listening to more of, you can find all the episodes at theimperialtruth.com, or they're on iTunes. You can search them with your podcatcher on your phone, as usual. And you can also come and join us on Facebook as well, if you search for The Imperial Truth, or on Twitter at Imperial_Truth. But that's enough from me. Go and listen to Nick talk, and hopefully we'll see you again. Okay, I'd like to welcome Nick Kyme to the show. So for those who are maybe thinking I know that name, Nick is an editor for Black Library, that's correct, yes?
It is indeed, yes.
For quite a while?
Oh, about 10 years, I think, just over.
10 years, blimey. And in that time you've written plenty of 40k stuff, the Heresy, you've written quite a few short stories. When we look back, things like Artifacts, which fit into the Salamanders bit, Gates of Terror, Promethean Sun, blimey, that was a long time ago, wasn't it?
Was indeed.
And then, of course, we've also had the Vulcan Lives and Deathfire, specifically, as the big novels you've done for the Heresy series.
That's the ones, yeah.
Excellent stuff. And, of course, as I say, you can go and find the other stuff. The best thing about Black Library website, I find, is you can type in an author's name in the search our products, and it comes up with all their stuff. So there's plenty of Age of Sigmar stuff as well, which I'm working my way through.
Oh, good.
Only the faithful. But yes, and you, I think it's fair to say, even before the Heresy, you were kind of the Salamanders guy.
Yeah, pretty much. It all started with a short story called Fires of War, which was in Heroes of the Space Marines. There's been a few of those kind of the Space Marines anthologies, but Heroes was the first one out of the gate, I believe, and I was fortunate enough to write quite a long short story. I think it's about 20 or 30,000 words. It's more almost like a novella, actually. And I guess that was an indication early on that I was probably hankering to do something of a slightly kind of more novel length kind of a project. So yeah, that was my first foray into the Salamanders, really. A kind of a chapter that hadn't had much of the spotlight, really, as far as, well, the background, or more particularly, Black Library fiction was concerned. I think Gav Thorpe wrote a short story a while back. I can't quite remember its name. I think it was in, like, the Galaxy Burn. That was a Salamander story.
Right.
But if my memory serves, I don't think there was anything else sort of prior to that was really kind of Salamander focused. So it was, good sort of virgin territory for me, really, to explore a chapter that was a first founding chapter, but hadn't had its kind of day in the spotlight, if you like.
Yeah. Before we get into kind of that side of it, was that your first? How long had you been writing before that?
Okay. So, well, I mean, I've kind of been writing for most of my adolescence and my adult life, to be fair, one thing or another. But in terms of getting published, I suppose, through BL, the first thing I ever got published, was a short story called Perfect Assassin, which appeared in Inferno, which was the kind of forerunner to, what a lot of people will be familiar with, Hammer and Bolter. Inferno was a bi-monthly magazine, print magazine. We didn't do digital back then. This was way back.
Yeah.
And it was a great little mag, actually. I really miss Inferno. The bulk of it was short stories, but there was also like cool little, kind of 3D kind of maps and stuff, like, illustrated maps, which kind of showed battle scenes or schematics of things, comic strips. It was a whole kind of gamut of different kind of cool material, but the core of it was short stories, and So I think it was way back in, 2008 maybe? It might have even been before then that story was published. And I did a couple more after that, and then my first book was a Necromunda novel called Back from the Dead.
Blimey, the Necromunda novels, yeah. I only read a couple of them. But, yeah, cool, that takes me back.
Yeah, me too. Just thinking about it now, I'm like, oh my god. I think I totally charmed Christian Dunn, who was the editor of those books, because unbeknownst to me, obviously now I know Christian really well, and he's a huge zombie fan. I mean, he loves zombie stuff. He lives, eats, and drinks it, to be honest. And Back from the Dead was a story that had plague zombies in it, and so I think I was a shoo-in just because of that reason, because I put zombies in. So yeah, that was my start really, and some Warhammer stuff followed, and then eventually I got into 40k.
Cool. So, as you said, the Salamanders, I mean, I'm trying to remember what I knew about the Salamanders before that kind of era, and it was very much the chapter-approved articles. We had one guy at the club who played them. They had less initiative, and they used plasma and flame. And they obviously had the dark skin, and that was pretty much it. And back then it was, it's been refined, shall we say, as time's progressed. Was it you were given the option of the Salamanders, or was it you put your hand up for Salamanders?
I think Lindsay Priestley and I, who's another long-serving editor actually at Black Library, we were talking about potential 40k projects. I think I just finished my second dwarf novel, and I was keen to try some 40k stuff. And we were kind of discussing what kind of story I might want to write, and Lindsay came up with this idea, this thing. So the concept of she was reading an article which was about kind of leaving no man behind, this kind of mentality, this military mentality of that sort of bond of brotherhood, if you like, and this concept of leaving no man behind, just this kind of high concept thing. And we were kind of debating, what could we? Is there a way that we can turn that into a story, or what chapter potentially? Because I was thinking about Space Marines at the time. What chapter of Space Marines would suit that sort of idea of self-sacrifice, putting others before yourself, and Salamanders kind of came up because that was something that was associated with that chapter at the time. I think in particular with reference to their actions on Armageddon, and their irritation at other chapters of Space Marines, like the Marines Malevolent, who actually featured pretty strongly in the first Salamander book. Their sort of treatment of the sort of civilians, and how they were pretty content or sanguine about collateral damage as long as they were kind of winning the war. The Salamanders' philosophy very, very different to that. Their notion of putting others first, this idea of self-sacrifice, self-reliance, seemed to lend itself really well to this notion of kind of leave no man behind, coming back to that concept. And it was born from that, really. So it was less about me kind of putting my hand up and saying, I really want to do Salamanders, and more kind of what we knew about the chapter at the time, and the fact it fitted in quite well with this kind of concept, this high concept. And it was at that point that I then went and did more research into the chapter, and found they were really, really exciting, really interesting. And there was clearly a lot of stuff for me to kind of delve into and tease out in the novels, in a relatively blank canvas as well, with that chapter, as opposed to some other chapters like Space Wolves, which Bill King had written a whole bunch of books about. Blood Angels, obviously James Swallow is really strongly associated with that particular chapter. Graham had done Ultramarines and so on and so forth. So there was quite a lot of areas that were already kind of well served, but Salamanders, wasn't one of them. So it was a great opportunity to really kind of put my stamp on a cool chapter. I mean, at first I was just trying to write a good short story, that might lead on to other things. I hadn't really thought about, I'm gonna be Mr. Salamander, and I'm gonna just write about those guys. That hadn't occurred to me at all. So I just want to write a cool story with some cool characters and see where it takes me. And this is where it took me, I suppose. Yeah,
a 40k Salamanders collection later.
Yeah.
And, at some point, a Heresy trilogy as well.
Yeah, definitely. The Heresy stuff, I wasn't really sure that I'd ever get much of a an opportunity to do anything really in the heresy, but I was intrigued by the bits of Salamander's background, such as it was. Isfahan 5 in particular, obviously, was a big part of their then background, which got referenced actually in the first Salamander book, Salamander. There were some echoes of that. So I think probably even from an early sort of stage, there were maybe subconsciously kind of wheels turning, thinking, oh, okay, maybe there's something interesting here. And that, obviously that series was kind of in midstream when I, started, writing more seriously about 40k. And I had a Salamanders, a 40k trilogy to finish before I was ever going to kind of really get involved in the heresy stuff. And the first opportunity that I got was Promethean Sun, which just kind of fell into my lap, really. It wasn't really something that I angled for. It was Christian approached me and said, we want to do some novellas. Sometimes even just by virtue of the fact of being the only writer who's kind of free, you sometimes get, who's got, a bit of a proven track record. You get a chance to do some stuff. And I thought, well, okay, yeah, I could definitely do that. That sounds cool. And it would be great if that led on to other things. And obviously at the time you're thinking, if it did, then here's potentially what I could do. I'd love to tell those stories. I'd love to tell some stuff about Vulcan. So I got to do a bit of that in Promethean Sun, which was kind of half origin story. Some of that stuff that you were talking about from chapter approved is kind of in there. There's some of that teased out, the trials and so on. Vulcan, seeing the Emperor, not that he knows it's him straight away. And all that kind of stuff is kind of in there, juxtaposed with a Great Crusade story. I was quite tentative during particularly that first novella. I didn't really want to kind of upset the apple cart too much. And I do regret that a little bit, because I think it meant I was reluctant to kind of try to, expand the background too much. So I'll just stay within, what's safe and what's known and try and tell a cool story. And I'm pleased with the way it turned out, but I think I was perhaps a little bit gun shy maybe, to begin with. And certainly when the opportunity came around to write the novel, to write Vulcan Lives and Scorched Earth and Deathfire and all that other stuff, I was much more kind of bullish with sort of, I suppose confident really, to suggest I'd like to do this with Vulcan. I'd like to do something that's not known. I'd like to reveal something about his character. I'd like to push that part of the story on. And I think I'm still probably a little bit cautious. I'm still kind of moving within the sort of Salamanders bubble, telling that kind of bit of the story. But then by the virtue of the fact that the Salamanders kind of tale, if you were to take Collective Visions as your guide, ends really at Isfahan, it sort of necessitates almost like this is the secret history of the Salamanders. This is what happened to Vulcan. This is where it went to. This is what it means. I think the third book, which is going to be my next project actually, after the thing I'm writing at the moment for somebody else, will really tell the kind of like, this is what Vulcan actually did during the Siege of Terror. This is how he was involved. This is the pivotal role that he took that no one will ever know about. And it kind of has to be that way, because any other approach would mean sort of debunking the continuity that we've already got. And I don't think that's, that it's not right to do that. I think it's got to be plausible that, that this story is going to be one of the many hidden stories like Imperium Secundus and some of the other stuff that's been coming out of the Age of Darkness kind of period, I guess.
Yeah, excellent. And for anyone who reads The Beast Arises as well, there's that's kind of handled quite well in that. I think I'll leave it at that for those who aren't up at that point on the Beast Arises series. Promethean Sun. That was the first limited edition.
Yeah, it was.
They did. Did you know that when you were writing it? The style of the release.
I didn't actually.
Okay.
I knew. It was back during a time actually in Black Library where we were kind of experimenting with lots of different things. We just started doing ebooks in a really meaningful way. We really started to push out our digital content, do some original content as well. Audiobooks, I think, were floating around at that sort of time as well, and they were pretty new for us. Obviously, we were sort of riding a bit of a crest of a wave of heresy, which was really starting to get some serious kind of traction as far as, well, just kind of selling books in general was concerned, and enabled us to do lots of other different things, which was really cool. And so as far as I was concerned, I was just writing another novella. I'd done, I think Assault on Black Reach, which is not a heresy, book. It's an Ultramarines one. That was like my kind of tester for a longer novel. So, I thought, I knew that I was writing a novella, and obviously I knew it was going to be, a kind of hardback, sort of limited, but I didn't really get a sense of its kind of position, I suppose, in the range until I pretty much finished it. And obviously we sold out, and it did really well in that regard, and obviously, Aurelian followed and set a great tradition, I think, of limited editions for a time, certainly. So yeah, it was fantastic to get a chance to do that, and it was, I don't know, I think, for whatever reason, I always think in kind of like in threes. So the novels have kind of, there is definitely a trilogy arc there that will conclude with the third book, but the novellas are sort of, because there's a third novella as well that's actually coming out later this year, which I can probably tell you a little bit about in a bit, if you like.
Yeah.
And the thing about the novellas is they don't really follow on, but they pick up kind of useful threads, I suppose, that are left by the novels that aren't kind of appropriate to cover in the novels, I guess.
Sure.
The weird thing about Scorched Earth and Vulcan Lives was, I think the timing got slightly squiffy with that, because Scorched Earth really should come before, if you're gonna read the Salamander stuff that I've written for the Horus Heresy, read Promethean Sun first, then read Scorched Earth, then read Vulcan Lives, then read Deathfire, and then the stuff that kind of follows that. It was the relationship between Scorched Earth and Vulcan Lives is an interesting one, because Scorched Earth does very much take place. I mean, it is in some ways, because of the timeline that's involved, it is kind of post bits of Vulcan Lives, but you kind of need to read that first, otherwise you'll can't. There's a cool twist in the story, but there's a reveal as well at the end, which will get spoiled if you've seen Vulcan Lives. It's kind of quite a declarative title, really, for that novel. There was a discussion at the time, I seem to remember, of whether or not we'd put an exclamation mark. Not my idea, and I sort of went, no, please don't do that. Please don't do that. And some jokes as well about, is it Vulcan Lives or is it Vulcan Lives? And whether or not it was like a sitcom, and I was thinking, okay, sure. So you have to take that sort of good-natured ribbon. But it's interesting thinking back at how all those kind of projects developed, way back with Promethean Sun, where it kind of all sort of kicked off. And there were definitely things then, even with that novella, that I was thinking, oh, okay, well, if I do get to do some more stuff, I'm going to lay some gentle foundations in here that, if I don't, then it doesn't matter. And if I do, then, well, there's some threads I can pick up later on and play with a little bit,
Yeah, there are certainly people who've jumped on the heresy train a lot later than when that came out. And I remember they were released at 7:00 on a Monday night, which is when I start work, for my firefighting job. So
right.
I remember sitting at the thing going, right, I'm going to be late because I need to get this, like a lot of people. And that one broke the internet, I think. It broke the internet, and I was lucky enough to get mine. I was like, awesome, I've got the gold edition. And then when Aurelian came out, it was Monday, 7:00 again, and I thought, oh no. And I actually took the night off.
That's awesome.
How sad's that?
See, that's dedication.
It is. And I sat there and I didn't get a copy of the gold edition. And I'm like, well, I'm not getting the silver because I'm a collector. And because I had the night off, I sat there and I just happened to look at Twitter, and then Black Library were like, oh yeah, we found some more gold copies where the basket had gone wrong. I was 10 minutes later, just went on, no problems at all, got a gold copy. I was all ready to sell my copy of Promethean Sun and get the normal ones.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was, so back, that was when they were really limited. Yeah, it was crazy times.
Crazy times.
Yeah, it's a long time ago now. But yeah, absolutely brilliant. And yeah, it's been a long time since I've read that. I was actually thinking when I was just having a look on the computer before we started talking, actually, I'll drag that one out and read that again.
Oh, cool.
Cause I remember reading some of your Iron Hands work. And at the time, now this is the point where I sound a bit awkward. At the time I was sitting there thinking, not a fan.
Yeah, okay,
Not a fan. And it's only in the years, why am I not a fan kind of thing? I couldn't work it out. I was like, is it Nick's writing? Is it this? You know, and some writers don't fit for some people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nature of the beast, isn't it? And I finally worked it out when I was reading some of Chris Wright's stuff, which I've loved. Everything he's written, except for his Iron Hands novel. And I'm like,
the chapter on Legion that you don't like.
I think it's the Iron Hands. They bore the hell out of me.
Fair enough.
So I was like, because it was a bit kind of like, all right, and it was Scorched Earth was the first time I read. I think I probably tweeted you at the time. Read it, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
It was on mark for what it was. We've got it's a bit different because we'd moved, like the Black Library had tried to move the story on, but there were still big gaps that needed to be told. And particularly, like, as you say, going back to Isfahan for the Salamanders was a big, how were you going to do the Salamanders without going from Isfahan? It's just kind of had to happen. It was natural.
Definitely. I quite agree. And I mean, that was very much at the forefront of my mind with Scorched Earth, was it's definitely going to be an Isfahan story. So when the kind of the opportunity came up to write another novella, I said, look, this is what I'm going to do. I've got a pretty clear idea as to what kind of story I want to tell. And, it's going to be bleak. It's going to be, you know, sort of essence of, bit sort of, flavor of kind of World War I trenches, kind of sort of feel to it. The Space Marines all upon crosses, being crucified, and it's dark. It's probably the darkest thing I've actually, ever written. But I tell you what, it's the most satisfying thing I've ever done.
All right.
Sure. It works. Everything I wanted it to do, it did. And you can't always say that as a writer. There's always things where you hand in your manuscripts and think, you know, I wish I'd just done that a little bit more. I wish I'd have worked that a bit more. And I think with Scorched Earth, it just, everything worked as I wanted it to. And the twist in that story, which I won't talk about in detail at all, because in case there's folks that haven't read it or are reading it or whatever, that didn't actually come until probably about halfway, maybe a bit more through the writing.
All right.
So I had to actually go back. I had a slightly different ending. I had to actually go back and massage some bits of the story. I thought, yeah, okay, I know what I'm going to do here. Yeah, I'll do that. And actually looking back, it wasn't actually that difficult. It was a few little bits and pieces I needed to kind of smooth out and change, little bits of dialogue here and there. And I was really happy with the way that turned out. I think most writers are kind of their worst critics, and they'll always, I don't read anything that I've written. Well, I do for research purposes, but I don't read it for pleasure. I find that quite a hard process because I'm constantly analysing, going, oh god, why, you know, that line could have been better, that bit of dialogue could have been better, that reveal could have been better. You're always kind of hypercritical because you want to kind of do better each time you write something. You want to do better, and it's juggling all these different components and making them really, really sing and really fit.
That must be harder as an editor as well, because that's your natural.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes you've got to let the editor part of your brain take a bit of a day off, or else you're just not going to get anything done. There are definitely times when I've been working on manuscripts, working on a novel, and I'll be doing the kind of the read through. Every time I start a new writing session, I'll read the last kind of, 500,000 words or whatever that or the last thing, depending on, which is closer. I'll read the last little chunk so I can kind of get myself into the atmosphere, the voice, remind myself what I was actually going to do. And the editor part of me kicks in immediately and says, just change that. I'll take that bit out. I'll tweak that. That word's not very good. Take that word out. That word's too flowery. Remove that word. And over time as well, I think the editor part of my brain has become, much more dominant, in the sense that, kind of much more ruthless about like stripping stuff back. That sounds like writing. Let's strip it back. That's not working. Strip it back. That dialogue exchange could be better. Remove it. Start again. But you do have to kind of say to that person, that kind of part of your personality, like, okay, just sit over there now and in that little box and just let the writer out just for a bit. And I'll get some stuff down and just let it kind of happen. You really do have to just kind of go a bit easier on yourself and kind of think, okay, I just need to get this stuff down. And then once the once the kind of the wet clay is there and you've got the rough shape of the vials or whatever, you can actually turn it into something, hopefully, good and exciting and worthy of your time, I guess.
Cool. Yeah, I can't even reference the films that Scorched Earth remind me of, because that would give it away. But I'm one of those guys who can happily go along with the story without worrying about what's coming. And I think I've trained myself to just accept what happens, and you can enjoy those moments a little bit more. So I was like, oh, that's cool. Because, I don't look for it coming. And Scorched Earth was definitely the first of your writing. I went, actually, I'm really digging Nick's work now. I'm right into it. Cool. Bring on Vulcan Lives. Which had its own shocking revelations, for starters.
Yeah, there's a few, actually.
A pretty big one. I think we could probably go into some of those as we go through.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, was that most of that story kind of worked out? Was this a classic Lords of the High Terror in your room at
World? Yeah, it was. I mean, so when a lot of writers reference, when the High Lords kind of gather, or the Heresy writers gather in the High Lords, and the meeting room where we convene is actually called the High Lords of Terror. So that's not a joke when they're saying that. They mean that literally. It's got a massive eagle emblazoned on the front. It's the front of the Games Workshop headquarters. So if you come into reception, see that it used to be an Imperial Eagle. Now it's a kind of a Sigmarite hammer and wings. But that glass behind that is the room. That's where it all happens. And so I was fortunate enough to be allowed to write Heresy novel, to write my Vulcan novel. This is the thing that I've kind of felt like I've been building up to. I'd done my apprenticeship for and sort of shown that I could hopefully turn something in that was of the requisite quality. But there was a few hurdles to get over first. And not least of which was suggesting something kind of, fairly radical, I think, at the time, concerning Vulcan, which I'm thinking the secret's out now, so I can probably
absolutely
say that.
I'll say it now. We're going to assume that you've read Vulcan Lives and Deathfire from this point onwards. So we will go and spoil stuff. They've been out for long enough that if you haven't read them, you're not a true Heresy fan. I think I'm allowed to say that. No, I'm only joking. But they've been out.
I'm not going to say that. But
I think Deathfire's been out in Legacy now. So
yeah, it has.
So you've got your opportunity. If you don't want to spoil anything, turn off now. Come back when you've read them.
Okay,
cool.
So obviously Vulcan's immortality, and not just the fact he's long-lived, but the fact he can't be killed. So I've been thinking about this for a while, and I thought, well, how can I explain how can I make the what apparently happened to Vulcan on Isstvan 5, that he disappeared in this explosion, or he was destroyed apparently. How can I make that kind of exciting and cool and interesting and reveal something different about the Primarch? What can I do? What's cool? How can I make it interesting in terms of developing that character?
And also fit the 40k fluff?
Yeah, there was a bit. I mean, I think some of that was byproduct, to be honest.
Right.
But yeah, the fact that he's actually there at the second founding, or allegedly there at the second founding, suggests that he did actually survive. And you kind of think, well, how did he? What happened? And so all those questions are kind of rolling around. I was thinking about the Salamander kind of the stuff that I'd done, and there's all the ideas of everything coming back to the earth and fire, and obviously you think about fire, you think about transformation, you think about and in its kind of metaphorical sense anyway, thinking about it's a potential metaphor for rebirth. And so that's kind of where the idea came from. I thought, well, Vulcan's an earthy character. He comes from a volcanic world. He's very much associated with fire. His legion's very much associated with fire. And so into the meeting I went and said, look, I want to tell this story about Vulcan, about what happened to him at Isstvan 5, and I want to make him immortal. And I said, and I don't mean long-lived. I mean that he can't be killed, that he keeps coming back. And I said, I don't want to explain how it happens, because I don't think anybody needs to kind of know how it happens. It's more interesting and mythical if we don't kind of know. And in Vulcan Lives Vulcan Lives really, because in Deathfire he's pretty much just a weekend at Bernie's kind of situation going on in that particular book. But certainly in Vulcan Lives, he's dispatched brutally many, many times. And at no point is it ever, in many different ways as well, and at no point is it ever revealed, how has he come back? Has he, because the inevitable questions you get is, what happens if, someone chops him up into little pieces and scatters him over all of the cosmos? Would he come back then? And the answer is always, well, yes. He's like, well, how would he come back? Says, I don't know.
I could just imagine there's a geek somewhere waiting for you to have written exactly how he comes back. I think I'll find, Mr. Kyme, that science dictates.
Yeah, exactly.
As well.
And my rejoinder to that is always, it's not scientific. It's meant to be mythical, and I've kind of really embraced that with Vulcan's story. It's a mythical story. It's I hope it's got some shades of kind of sort of Greek legend, kind of classical world legend about it. It's not meant to be something you can quantify with science. It's myth, it's belief, it's weird, essentially, which is, and the better question to ask, is why, rather than how. I think the how is, okay, yeah, that might be quite interesting to know, but the why, why has he been made immortal? Is it by design? Is it by accident? Is there a purpose? He has got a purpose, of course he has. And I'm going to write what that purpose is in a later book. But there are hints definitely in Vulcan as to how it kind of works. Like he comes back and his body feels really warm, and he hasn't got the scars that he had before. So clearly something has changed in him. And I didn't want it to be a situation where Vulcan would die and he could, more or less kind of come back straight away, kind of in Wolverine style. He does that a little bit in Unremembered Empire. I think I'll allow the master, Dan, to kind of take him off on that particular channel, I suppose, for that book. But the intent really with Vulcan and what will be reinforced in future kind of installments of his story is that coming back from whatever death he might have experienced is not pleasant, it's not easy. And it's not just a case of, his wounds will heal, his arm will reattach. If he gets burnt to a crisp, his body will somehow come back together. It doesn't work that way. My intent was that there'd be potentially several different explanations for how Vulcan would be restored. But what matters is that he was restored and kind of the effect that had on him, sort of mentally. That was the payoff really for Vulcan, and that was why Kurz was such a kind of an exquisite torturer for him. Not just because, of course, Kurz is probably the arch torturer really of the heresy. He's really good at that sort of stuff because he really likes it. But Vulcan in many ways is the perfect victim because he presents a conundrum in the sense that Kurz can't kind of kill him bodily, can't finish him off bodily because he's tried that many different ways, and a few of those are described in the book. But my thought process behind that was that it actually happened a lot. There was loads of different, I'm sure I could tell like some mini short stories, grim as they might be, of Vulcan's various deaths that kind of occurred, and there'd be hundreds of them. Loads of different imaginative, horrible ways that Kurz would think, oh, maybe this will kill him, or maybe that will kill him, maybe this will kill him, in a kind of a sort of true Groundhog Day kind of style when Bill Murray's character obviously starts to experiment with his recurring day, I suppose. A little bit like that, I guess. But the idea that he would become less balanced mentally as a result of each resurrection, he would become more and more, I suppose, like the sort of the more feral side of Kurz, really, because there's a feral side to that character.
Primal. Yeah,
primal. That's a really good word to use, actually. Yeah, the primal side of that character.
The base emotions, yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely, there's a bit of a Batman Joker vibe going on there, I think. Just in the sense that, I'm not saying that Vulcan's Batman, he's not, but just in the sense, and that Kurz is the Joker because he's not, but just in the sense that Kurz is trying to bring Vulcan down to his level, to say, look, you all kind of look at me as if I'm some sort of freak, some sort of fiend, to be reviled, all the things that I've done, the things that I will do. But really, we're all kind of, when push comes to shove, if driven to the extreme, we'll all make the same choice at the end of the day. And you're not so different to me. And I think, that was the root of their sort of psychological battle in that book that Kurz was determined to show Vulcan, who was ostensibly one of the most, I guess, humane of the Primarchs, that was really concerned with people and us, and these kind of more salubrious sort of attributes, that even somebody like that could be, brought right down to something dark, and unforgivable. But of course, Vulcan was able to cling to a shred of his sanity just long enough to effectively trick Kurz into letting him out of the labyrinth, which he would never have escaped were it not for that.
Sure, yeah. And that's continued in the Imperium Secundus with Kurz trying to show the other three Primarchs the reality of whether he's trying to convince himself or trying to show them. That's a whole different story. And depends very much on the story being told, the book written, who's writing it, point of view characters.
Yeah, and who's reading it as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can draw all sorts. I think that's what's great about the Heresy series. There's so much kind of additional meaning in there that is supplied by the reader, that every reader's experience. It's going to be different anyway, but just in terms of, what does that mean? What's that character driving at? What's really behind the motivation here? And there are often, several explanations for it, each of which are, viable and valid. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's why, in a weird way, that slightly different Vulcan in Unremembered Empire is fine, because Unremembered Empire is much, it feels to me is much more of a comic book, action film, that kind of thing, which is what the action elements of it do as well. But also there's different viewpoints and everything else. And then on top of that, what really kind of makes me smile every now and then is people say, well, Aaron wrote this book, so I give that more weight than this book written by whoever and this book written by whoever. So yeah, there's all those influences, change our view on it, which is quite one of the good things about the series, really.
Yeah, definitely.
Excellent stuff. I had a couple of bits there I was going to come back on, and I can't remember any of them. I like the Batman Joker style. As soon as you said it, I was like, oh yeah, cool. Yeah. No, I see what you mean there. That real tussle going on between the two.
I think it's the psychological part of it, because the physical contest is kind of moot, really, because Kurz has got him, and there's nothing Vulcan can do. He's at his mercy in a lot of ways. The battle very much between those two characters in Vulcan Lives is a psychological one.
Yeah, and there are many times that the Joker thinks he's got Batman in the same position, to be fair. Thinks he does until the new toy they're testing comes out. Was the plan for all the flashbacks, was that in there straight away? The kind of testing Istvan against the cages in now.
Pretty much. I mean, it comes back to what you were saying earlier, that we'd reached a point in Horus Heresy where we couldn't really legitimately kind of go back. We had to kind of maintain some forward momentum, and there's a bit of forward momentum, I think, in Vulcan. It's certainly quite a bit. I mean, it positions a lot of Primarchs ready for the kind of the next big sort of Nexus novel, which was Unremembered Empire. So there's plenty of that goes on in there. But one of the things that always bothered me was that Istvan 5 was such a big conflict, and we'd never really done a book, Istvan 5. Graham obviously covered it in a bit of detail at the end of Fulgrim, but I think that was very much kind of like a coda to that book, a meaty one, admittedly, and there was some great stuff in there. And it was kind of told pretty much from Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus' point of view, as is right and appropriate for that book. But there wasn't really an opportunity to do anything else with kind of Istvan. So in order to see Vulcan as because that was kind of the key, really. It's like, there's this book about Vulcan Lives, and it's all about this Primarch, but you only get to see him being beaten up and being a victim, basically, and you don't get to see him in his full Primarchiness. So the part of the rationale for including the Istvan 5 sections, other than to play with the pacing a little bit, and to create a dual storyline, which enabled me to hopefully heighten some of the tension and with the reveals, and then you have to have a break for a bit where you read about kind of Isstvan 5, and it performed a useful function in that sense from a structural kind of point of view. It was really an opportunity to show, Vulcan kicking ass and taking names without putting a sort of too fine a point on it, to show, what did happen, on Isstvan 5, and to see, the Pyre Guard again. They were in Promethean Sun a little bit, but an opportunity to give those guys a bit of an airing before they all pretty much got murdered or maimed, and to have some fun, in inverted commas, with a proper balls out war story, I suppose, bit of the plot anyway. That kind of thread, that subplot was all about, just having some good sort of hardcore kind of war action. And that's really what that was about. And the juxtaposition between, Vulcan as he is now and Vulcan as he was at that point, and everything that led to that, it very much feels and felt certainly that any story about, certainly the first novel-length project about Vulcan had to acknowledge Isstvan 5, because it's so formative in terms of his legion's development and evolution, the Primarch's development and evolution. Everything cannot help but be coloured by what happened on Isstvan 5, and I think of all the Primarchs, who's going to be the most kind of deeply affected, and which legions are going to be the most deeply affected? For me, that was always the Salamanders, and that's personal preference, of course. So there was.
Some would argue that Ferrus was most deeply affected.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Ferrus. I think there's a lot of personal obsession wrapped up with his journey, and arrogance too, and I think an acute betrayal, because Ferrus is obviously he's incensed and indignant about what occurs on Isstvan 5, but the thing that really sticks in his craw is Fulgrim, because Fulgrim's supposed to be his friend. Yeah. And I think that's and he even had the audacity to go to Ferrus and say, "Do you want to join the other side?" And Ferrus is like, "What the? You can't say that to me." And so, but I think you're right, from a personal kind of point of view, yeah, Ferrus has got some kind of access to grind with that. But the difference for me is that Ferrus didn't survive to bear the weight of that in, kind of what comes next, whereas Vulcan does. And I think it's one thing the fiery, the sense of betrayal in the moment, and all that means, and everything that suggests about who you are and who your brothers are, and all the alliances you thought you'd made, and all those kind of things that are wrapped up with that in that moment, that cauldron of battle. But I think in the cold light of day, when you've had a chance to reflect on it a little bit more, and to see and live through the aftermath of that, I think that's a different kind of burden that Vulcan's shouldering, I think. Just because of his nature, really. But as I say, that's personal preference.
Yeah, cool. Just going back to End of Deathfire, so we've gone through, obviously, escapes, and Eldrad appears. There's Eldrad, there's, trying to remember the names now of the word bearer. We got the stories mixed up. We've got basically, you've as you said, this goes into Unremembered Empire and everything involved in Imperial Secundus. Was that something you worked closely with Dan on reaching point Z of this story to point A of his story?
Yeah, we definitely did. So obviously I knew that Imperium Secundus was going to be a thing. It had been referenced a little bit in some stories beforehand. The name would certainly come up. And during that conversation I mentioned earlier, where I kind of moved with the idea of Vulcan's special gift, I said, well, look, here's what I'm thinking about doing. And what I'd like to do at the end of that story is have Vulcan effectively use the Dawnbringer, his hammer, to wrench him out of the labyrinth. And the intention was he'd go back to his ship. That was the intended. That wasn't the story. That was the intended purpose of the hammer.
Sure.
But obviously it gets captured up in the sort of the beacon from Imperium Secundus, and he appears burnt to a crisp, pretty much dead in a crater somewhere on McCrag. And so that we had that conversation, and I said, look, this is what I want to do. I want to take Vulcan to Imperium Secundus. I think it'd be really cool. I want to connect it to the next part of the story. And it could be an awesome baton to kind of hand off to another writer. And thankfully, Dan agreed. Yeah, he thought that was really cool. And we worked together as to, kind of how that would work. And that for me was the moment when, Vulcaners really became part of cemented kind of in the kind of the wider part of that bit of the heresy, I suppose. It wasn't just about Isfan fighting Historia anymore. It was like, this is where Vulcan's story actually brushes against, another part of the story with a whole bunch of Primarchs and stuff. So.
Yeah, I say, not just him, we had other characters coming through into the story as well. And following.
You're talking about Bathus and Narek, aren't you?
Narek, that's the one. Yeah.
Yeah.
God, blimey. Yeah, it's too many names in the heresy these days.
Oh, that's cool.
Narek as well. That it must be interesting to, obviously, I'm guessing that you hear stuff about your own books, even if you're not looking for it. There was a lot of conjecture, a lot of people trying to work out where Vulcan had gone at the end of the book.
Yeah.
And of course, with Unremembered Empire, then people were like, "Oh, how did he get there? Then what was he doing? And timey, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey," as Laurie would say, as the answer. Is that something that you kind of are aware of a lot with people questioning things like that?
No, not really. I mean, I don't. I guess. I mean, I know some writers spend a lot of time looking at forums and reviews and that kind of thing. I don't usually do a lot of that. I think the way my philosophy goes is that I have to write the book that I have to write.
Yeah.
And it's a story that's written by me. It's not written by a committee. And it's what I think. I guess talking to editors and other writers, of course, is the way that I want to move the story forward. And I feel like I've got to be honest and true to that, because although there are going to be folks out there that might have other thoughts and other ideas, and they're totally entitled to those, and that's great. But I mean, I'd have to heed those thoughts and kind of see what I mean. And that's hope that doesn't come across as bullish as it just sounded. But what I'm really saying is that there's a plan in place, and what works for one doesn't always work for another. And I think if you try to bend and change the shape that you've got, it will come out as a kind of a malformed mess. It'll be like a Batman versus Superman style situation where the whole thing just kind of gets warped into some sort of unholy creation.
Let's just sorry if that's offended any Batman versus Superman fans, but you're wrong.
Don't get me wrong.
No, you're not
like
wrong.
the extended cut of that film.
Right. I haven't watched it yet. Zack Snyder. Need we say more?
Sorry, folks, if you like. I'm a big Batman fan. Maybe that's why,
it is what it is. And I think it takes a very kind of, it takes a type of personality to be able to read those forums or whatever. Because as you say, the problem is person A says, "Oh, that doesn't work." Person B says it does work. Person C says, "Oh, well, I would have done it this way." So you're never going to win anyway. Particularly with, it's quite interesting to watch from the outside people talking who don't accept certain parts of the canon as canon for whatever value you've got of canon. They're like, "Oh yeah, I don't like that book. I don't think it's part of the story." And it's like, well, it's got a big number on its spine and it's got Horus Heresy written on it. So, there are certainly elements of that story you have to take.
I think so. I think if you're gonna say I'm a member of this club, the Horus Heresy Club, and I read the novels and I like the novels. I'm not sure you can really pick and choose which bits you like and which bits you don't like, and consider yourself like a proper fan. I'm a huge fan of Batman. I read all the Batman comics. I've done for a long time. And yeah, there's definitely some storylines where I go, I'm not sure I'd have done it that way, or actually not even that. I don't like that, because that's ultimately what it boils down to. It's like, I don't like that thing. That's not for me. That particular story and that bit of lore that you've introduced, I'm not a fan, but I accept that it's part of the background. I think you can't really, you can do what you like. Everyone's, it's a free country, right? But
you're going to run into your own inconsistencies through the story when you start picking and choosing.
I think so. I think, it's just, some folks will like some stuff and some folks, won't like stuff. And I think, that's okay. But, to declare that, to declare that one thing is canon because you because you like it, and another thing is not canon because you don't like it. I mean, there's some pretty flawed logic, kind of behind that.
Yeah.
I accept that some folks like stuff and some other folks like other stuff, and that's cool. But to turn around and go, that's not canon because I don't like it. It's just like, listen to yourself. Come on. That's crazy.
We'll move on to Deathfire. I think, because I think for what Vulcan Lives is, I think we've covered it pretty much. It's,
yeah, sure.
It's, it is the story it is, and it's great for that. Deathfire now, stylistically, quite different.
Yeah.
So what was the thought processes on that one?
Well, Deathfire is a journey story, and it's kind of sort of told in the traditions of the Odyssey. That's kind of where it takes some of its inspiration. And there are some kind of almost direct references. I mean, there's a cycle in it, for starters, and some other stuff. And you'll find there's a character called Laestigon as well. And if you go back, and I don't know how familiar folks are with the Odyssey, but if you go back and do some research and look at some of that stuff, you'll definitely find little bits and pieces where I've taken some inspiration from and it's meant to be little cute kind of nods and references, really. So folks who go, oh, this is kind of like got an Odyssey vibe. Oh, okay, I see what he's done there. Hopefully, it was that kind of thing. And do you know the hardest thing about that book was getting Vulcan off bloody McCrack. That was the most difficult bit. Oh man, it was so hard to kind of wrangle that. I just felt like it was taking up so much time. I was like, oh my god, but it had to be. It couldn't just be, hey, we've turned up and we want our Primarch back and we're going to go and do this thing, because the situation, such as it was, meant that wouldn't have been very realistic. So I had to get it to a place, the story to a place, the characters to a place where at least I felt that it was plausible that they could then leave and undertake this kind of mammoth journey back to Nocturne, effectively through the Ruinstorm, which was meant to be pretty impossible, to be fair. And all the stuff that kind of happens. And there's kind of a bit of a Hunt for Red October vibe as well, because they're on the ship all the time. It's kind of quite claustrophobic in that sort of sense. And yeah, they do some stuff in between, but it's pretty much, the action takes place on the ship. And there are some interesting little spanners in the works, and there's some stuff involving a certain word bearer who crops up again, well, he doesn't really know what the hell's going on in fairness to him, which is kind of how I intended it. Narek is a cool character for me to write. I'm looking forward to kind of seeing the end of his journey, knowing what he's going to do, kind of right at the end point of the Horus Heresy, or towards the end point of the Horus Heresy.
Right, there we go. There's a little tease, if ever I heard one.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even a false tease, because I know what it is, because we've talked about it. It might not be me that does it. I mean, it might be somebody else, but we've kind of said, hey, this is what we're going to do with Narek. This is where he's going to be. This is what's going to happen with him. So I'm looking forward to that. That should be cool. And he's in this story. I mean, it's very much, Artellus Numion, who was one of the Pyguard captain, actually, the sort of the seven samurai, I suppose, that Vulcan surrounds himself with his bodyguards. Not that he kind of needs them, and what Primarch does. there is kind of his peers, I suppose, in that sort of sense, amongst his legion, I guess. But first among them is Artellus Numion, and he's one of the survivors of Ispan. He's one of the Pyguard survivors. There's not many of them. He thinks he's the last one, and he may well be. I'm pretty sure there's another guy without any legs that may have survived, but certainly in this story, the focus is very much on Numion and his belief in the fact that Vulcan lives, and it takes that idea to a different kind of level, more of a sort of I don't know, like a theological level. In fact, this notion that Vulcan could have survived in spite of the Fulgurite spear. And yeah, there's definitely shades of the, kind of Christ on the cross and the spear and all that kind of stuff piercing his side. There's the sword in the stone, Sleeping Beauty even. There's a lot of that stuff wrapped up, in Vulcan, who is essentially, he's pretty much a corpse for the whole story. There's a couple of trippy bits where is that really Vulcan? Is it not? Kind of does he? There's a bit in on Imperium Secundus where he may or may not have actually got out of his tomb or walked around for a bit. I say his tomb, the casket is kind of in, I guess. So there's meant the very start of that story is meant to be some quite serious doubt cast on, is Vulcan actually dead? Is it possible that, that's the first question, is it possible that he could have survived? And I suppose it's a little bit about, belief. Talked a little bit earlier about Vulcan's story being a mythic story. Well, this is a really mythic story.
Yeah.
It's a mythic journey. It shouldn't have been possible for the Numion and the Salamanders that were on Imperium Secundus to reach, Nocturne, and yet they did. And
not just Nocturne, but the edges of the Sol system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Slightly different thing there, but
they have some help with some of that, though.
Yeah, as you say, very much when you were talking there, I was thinking about the myth. But as you say, this is the first time we get not the first time we really get more than one person into that belief system that kind of permeates a little bit, kind of 40k when they're looking at the Emperor. It's kind of a building of that. We've had one or two people noting down a belief, like Garrow particularly having something going on. But yeah, it felt like a bit of a kind of a sea change. Well, not a sea change, but a marker that things are starting to maybe change or have the potential to change, shall we say?
I think so. I think the core of certainly the Horus Heresy, particularly the Great Crusade part of it, was very much a kind of a battle of science versus superstition. There are some kind of Age of Enlightenment vibes, I think, that come across a little bit with that. And I think with obviously science in terms of the Great Crusade is dominant. The Emperor's a scientist. He refutes the existence of kind of deities and witchery and all that sort of stuff, and yet, clearly it exists. And the Horus Heresy represents, or the war represents a return to superstition, in my head at least. And I think this story very much kind of starts to move in that direction, that there is more, kind of in heaven and earth and kind of just what we can perceive with our ordinary senses. If you sort of what we can explain with science, there is more in the universe than just that. And this story kind of echoes some of that, I think.
Yeah, it's got, and that carries all the way through the book, even when we get to Nocturne at the end. Especially, which was quite cool. As you say, we do have a visitor. We have a shard of a visitor, shall we say?
Yeah.
A piece of Magnus who we haven't seen for a while. Still waiting on Graham's book to make his mind up.
He's beavering away at that.
Yeah, I know.
I'm sure he's hard at work on that.
A slight jest, but we've seen a couple of things about Magnus, but not a lot. And this very much seemed to me like Magnus has pretty much made his mind up. He's paying off some debt, almost, and it's setting that up for when we do get to Graham's story. Was Magnus because of the links to the Odyssey? Was that the first reason he was there, or was it?
No, there was some of that. I think having a powerful, psychically powerful magical character in a story about myth and science and power and magic just kind of seemed to make sense, really.
Sure.
It was like, who else could potentially, materialize on the ship and do some cool. And it was Magnus, and getting an opportunity to do a little bit of something with Magnus and particularly with how he sees Vulcan and what that, and just a hint at what that relationship might have been, was too good a chance to pass up. And he was the right fit. I think sometimes when you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to write, do a heresy story and this is the kind of thing I'm going to do, and you put, there's probably 9 times out of 10 there's some sort of Primarch focus, thinking, okay, well this is going to be one that that tells a story, that focuses really strongly on Korax or Lorgar or something like that. And inevitably, in order to help, you kind of show what that Primarch is like, it's good to have them weighed up against another Primarch, because by showing kind of what they're not and what the other Primarch is, it tells you loads about, both of those characters without having to actually say it.
Sure.
So inevitably there's going to be points when you're writing a story and you think, okay, who's the perfect Primarch? Who kind of really fits into this mold? Sometimes those decisions are kind of made for you because of the canon and certain things are in certain places, and so that reduces your options. But with a character like Magnus, particularly one who's been split into multiple shards, there was an opportunity to do something cool with him, and it just really fit that Magnus was the right choice, I think. If anyone's going to be kind of abroad in the Ruin Storm, it's going to be Magnus, right? It's probably not going to be anybody else. So that was kind of where the driver for that kind of came from. And yeah, of course, he is the Cyclops, and there's some great Odyssey connection there. Some fun sort of connective tissue, which, I could point at a little bit, which is always cool.
Cool. So, we had the same number of chapters as the Odyssey, is that correct?
Oh, I don't know, did it?
Did I hear that, or am I mishearing that?
I don't know.
Oh, I thought that was a thing.
It might have been, and it might be. I just might not remember it.
I think it may even be the acknowledgement. At the end, the afterword.
Okay. Yeah,
I'm trying to remember myself now, as I say.
Yeah.
Not a very good memory and too many books.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah, was the writing style you chose were you purposefully trying to get into that as well? Was that something you did, or was it just your writing style, as it were?
I think it was the start of that.
Okay.
I don't think I was emulating James Joyce particularly, or Homer. I'm thinking about, James Joyce wrote a fantastic version of the Odyssey.
Sure.
Old now. But yeah, it wasn't an intent to emulate a particular style. I suppose it was a bit more sort of, I don't know, I guess epic sounding, slightly antiquated maybe in its sort of tonality.
I think from reading it felt slightly different, whether that was intentional or not. I don't know. It did feel slightly differently. And I think particularly some people that affected more than others. Or noticed it more than others. It's weird how you can read a book and notice something in the writing style, with some authors. David Annandale, once for me, sometimes I really notice the way the length of his sentences.
Yeah, sure.
And it kind of jumps out at me. And, again, my friends are like, no, didn't see that at all. And I'm like, oh, okay.
I think on a subconscious level, sure. You have to be a little bit chameleon-like, I think, sometimes with you writing that and make it fit to whatever the story is. And it just kind of happens naturally because of the type of story, the characters that involve, the things that are being kind of the themes that are being, kind of explored, I guess, in the narrative. So yeah, I'm sure there was a part of that that was deliberate.
Excellent.
Most of the time it's just, I just want to got to get the story down, make sure it works, and all that stuff I was talking about earlier with dealing with the persistent editor and like, oh, okay,
sure.
Let's kind of power on.
Yeah, Deathfire for me very much left a lot of questions, a lot of queries. Almost actually, when you think about it, as a trilogy, they probably all do. Kind of not necessarily setting up a third book, but just aren't, because I don't necessarily think that all those questions will be answered in the third book, because some of them are to do with other subjects. But yeah, I've got to the end of it and I was like very eager to know about, particularly we got Narek, we've got Vulcan at the end, we've got Magnus, you've got the whole journey itself and everything that went on with that. And yeah, I did find it kind of like, it's opening up again, where it's particularly against the Imperium Secundus bit, which closed off a lot of things. Opened some up as well, but it did bring certain journeys to an end.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff is kind of planned, relatively far in advance. Not in huge amounts of detail, admittedly, because you want some room to manoeuvre. But where the Vulcan story kind of goes next, and it was always intended to, where it's going to go, it was always intended to kind of go there. sort of necessitated a bit of a hiatus, if you like, before we pick up the next strand, and really, Deathfire was a kind of a story about the Salamanders Legion, but about getting, Vulcan back on the table,
sure,
if you like. But there is meaning behind his, death and subsequent resurrection, above and beyond the metaphorical stuff that we've already talked about. There is a reason. There is an actual reason for it happening. It had to happen for X, which, I know what X is. I'm not saying it and going,
no,
X.
Fine.
I don't even know what I'm talking about. I do genuinely know what that X is, but you won't find that out until, it's infuriating, isn't it, when authors say that sort of stuff.
I think most listeners to this show will know that, like the kind of the major points are sort of planned all the way through now.
Yeah.
We know that Black Library know what they're doing, shall we say. So
it's got a definite endpoint. We know how many books, we know how many books there are, we know what they are, we know when they're going to appear, we pretty much know who's writing them as well, actually. So that stuff is finite now. Sure. Whereas I think maybe that 2 or 3 years ago, perhaps, it was still a bit like, we'll see how things go. It's like, no, this is it now. We're on the homeward trail. It's a long-ish homeward trail, just by virtue of the fact that the books are a bit more spaced out than perhaps they were. There was a point when I'm just coming like all the time to kind of spread them out a little bit more, not just to give people a chance to take a breath really and read them, rather than feel like they're on a treadmill going at 20 miles an hour, which is no fun at all.
No, absolutely. I think across those books, as you say, there's a lot of things have been handled. The Perpetual one is kind of, that was the big one. That's all of a sudden, that's not just worrying about Vulcan. That's looking at other beings, and particularly, the Emperor.
Yeah.
Throwing a different light maybe on what he could be, on what goes on with him, when you link it back to all the information we've got from the other Perpetuals as well. There's as a group of fans on a forum, there's so much to talk about, so much to chat about, and actually, in some ways, there's a fun in that which you might lose some of when you do finally get some of the later books. I'm sure we're not going to get all the secrets because there's no fun in that either. But
no, you won't. You won't. All questions won't be answered, and that's deliberate because you're quite right. And it is cool, fun, exciting to be able to speculate on this kind of stuff. I think there should be, explaining the meaning of everything. With the mystery, where's the mystery in that? Where's the power in that? There isn't any. Yes, it has to be satisfying in the sense that you get some answers, but at the same time, there will be some things that are kind of left still kind of open to speculation. I think that's nice. I think that's kind of cool. As a fan of stuff like this myself, I love all that. I think it's interesting to be able to have those kind of conversations, sharing those kind of theories about what does that mean, what could it kind of pretend. I think that stuff's cool, and we shouldn't lose that for the horror series. I think it should definitely feel like an ending. It should definitely feel satisfying. I think most of the major stuff should be explained. But there are going to be a couple of things. I'd say a couple. There's probably going to be quite a few things that are still left kind of like, well, who knows? You just have to, you might never know.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, you just have to put up with it, people.
Treat it as something cool to speculate on.
Yeah.
Rather than oh my God, I have to know. Cause we've all been there. We all know what that's like about the various different things that we get really geeky about. So, I think it'd be a shame to lose that.
I mean, every time you explain something, it only opens up more questions anyway, so you end up down a rabbit hole that just never ends. Brilliant.
All right, fantastic.
You did mention a third Salamanders novella.
Yeah, okay. So,
I did write that down.
Yeah, all right. So, what can I say about it? A couple of things, I guess. So it's called Sons of the Forge. It is a story that takes place during Deathfire. Although it's technically a novella, it's actually almost double the size of Scorched Earth, so it's a bit meatier actually. in terms of length and therefore in terms of the story. And it has some really strong connective tissue with the short story Artifacts.
Sure, yeah.
And that is the focus of the story.
Excellent stuff.
We'll not to say no more than that. That's
no, absolutely. We'll try not to get you in trouble. And is the third instalment of the Salamanders, is that planned out for when you're working on that one? I know you're.
Yeah, I'm coming up to that pretty soon. I've got another thing that I'm doing at the moment, which I'm almost finished with, and then I'm going to move on to Old Earth, which is the third and final. For me at least, final Vulcan installment. In fact, it definitely will be. It's the final installment of a Vulcan story in the sort of the heresy sort of main storyline, and we may or may not see some stuff from him in Siege of Terror. I guess, who knows? But in terms of the sort of the story up to that point, this is going to be the last time you'll see him, and it will attempt to wrap up some stuff that has come up in the first two books, and certainly hope to bring it to pretty satisfying conclusion.
Brilliant, excellent. I mean, obviously we're going to have a Primarchs novel about him at some point as well.
That's true. Yeah, we will.
Series as well. Is that something you've got your eye on, or has that been?
Well, not at the moment. I mean, I've read a lot of stuff about Vulcan, so it's certainly in terms of the heresy storyline, yeah, very much so. Old Earth is what I'm about, because it's effectively sort of the third part of that story, really. Yeah. So for sure, I definitely want to finish that. But I certainly don't feel so precious with the character that if there was a Primarchs book, I must write that Vulcan. But it's like, what the hell else do I say about him? I mean, oh my god, I've written like a whole bunch of stuff. So it might be nice to do something a bit different. I mean, I was going to say something, but I won't. To do with what we were talking about earlier, because Vulcan doesn't just appear in those books. There are other things where he's mentioned it from time to time, and I've not done all of those, so I very much see the.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
My Vulcan journey is very much it started with Promethean Sun and it ends with Old Earth, and that I think that's, if I get that down and how I want it to be, I'll be very satisfied and very happy with that. And then I think it'll be time to kind of go and look at something else. But who knows? I might wake up tonight and go, oh my god, I've had an amazing idea for the Vulcan Primarchs novel. But I doubt it, just because my thought at the moment is as it should be, and like on Old Earth. It's like, yeah, okay, that's what I need to. Yeah, that's what I need to do next. That's where I need to put my attention and my focus. But I'd be fascinating to see it. I mean, if it was someone else that wrote that, I'd be really interested to see what their take would be, and how much of the stuff that I'd done kind of made it across, and it's always interesting to kind of get an impression of that stuff through a different kind of lens, and in this instance, that lens being a different writer. It's actually quite fun to kind of see that and go, oh yeah, cool, that's a really interesting take on that. I never really thought about it in that way. And it's interesting how you kind of interpreted that thing that I've done here and looked at it in a different angle. That stuff's always kind of cool, because it helps you kind of think in slightly different ways too, gets you out of the sort of the tracks that you normally kind of, adhere to. You can you start to get a look into someone else's world through their voice, if you like. With some of the characters that you've helped to sort of develop, and see how the approach is different, and it's quite cool to kind of get out of that, get out of your own kind of voice for a bit and go, that's a really interesting take. I really like that. That's really, really cool.
Sure. Yeah. And on top of that, of course, it's easy to forget, because we see your name on the sides of books that you're editing books as well. So there's
a day job.
Exactly. Which, as well, with the stuff that Black Library are putting out at the moment, Age of Sigmar, some of the listeners might be reading along with that. The quantity of that stuff that's coming out, things like Beast of Rises going on, and we've seen all the leaks of the Harusian Wars, or however you pronounce it. So there's stuff. There's obviously stuff going on in Black Library. It's continuing apace.
Yeah, of course.
Which is great to see.
There's some fantastic stuff coming up. I suppose I've got to say that, haven't I? Because, but I could have just have said nothing really. But no, there's some really great stuff coming up. There's some really interesting series that we've got coming out. Now and towards the end of the year as well. Obviously, Beast Rises is going to be coming to a close. Primarch is kind of ongoing. There's some really interesting stuff in the works that I think folks are really going to enjoy.
Brilliant.
Fantastic writers.
Excellent stuff. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. It's been a really good talking to you.
It's been good fun. Well, we might have to get you back on again at some point, particularly
I'd be delighted if you'd have me.
Particularly when the final instalment is out for Vulcan's Heresy story.
Oh, definitely.
That'd be great to do. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.